What would you do if an alpha saw your injured child dying in your arms, but chose to claim you? First, Elara came to the Northern Dominion with only one prayer: save her son. But when Kael Draven appeared before the entire pack, he did the unthinkable. He ignored the wounded child, walked straight to the desperate mother, and marked her in front of everyone. To Elara, it felt like betrayal. To the pack, it looked like madness. But Kael knew one secret no one else understood: if he saved the child first, the boy would die. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's begin the story. Snow doesn't care who you used to be. It doesn't care that Elara Vane once had a place by a warm hearth, that she once wore clean cloth and walked through her pack's territory without looking over her shoulder. Snow falls on queens and outcasts the same way: silent, relentless, and cold enough to erase footprints like the world itself is trying to forget you ever existed. Alara's lungs burned as she ran. Not the kind of run that feels like freedom. This was the run you do when your body is already done and your mind is the only thing dragging you forward by the throat. Her boots sank into powder and ice, her cloak patch torn, and too thin snapped behind her in the wind like a warning flag. In her arms was Kael. He was small enough to fit against her chest, but heavy in the way a dying child becomes heavy, every breath turning into a weight a mother feels in her bones. His skin was hot, fever hot, yet his fingers were cold. His lashes clung together with melted snow. Every few steps, his body trembled in a tiny jerk, like his wolf inside him was fighting to stay awake. Elara tightened her grip until her arms ached. "It's okay," she whispered, the words torn from her throat by the wind. "I'm here. You just have to hold on a little longer." Kael's head lolled against her shoulder. His breathing hitched weak and uneven. The sound of it, thin and broken, made panic flare through her like fire. A gust slammed into her from the side, hard enough that her knees buckled. She caught herself on instinct, stumbling, almost falling. Her foot skidded on a hidden patch of ice, and for one terrifying second, she saw them both going down Kael's body, hitting the ground, his fragile breath getting knocked out of him for good. "No," she gasped, correcting her balance at the last moment. She kept moving faster now, as if speed could outrun fate. Warmth seeped through the cloth pressed between them. It took her a heartbeat to realize it wasn't warmth. It was the slow, spreading damp of Kael's wound seeping into her sleeve and against her skin. The cold turned it sticky. The wind turned it cruel. Elara's voice went thinner. "No, don't fall asleep. Kael, look at me." His eyelids fluttered but didn't lift. And right then, as she ran through the white blur of the forest, the past slid in beside her, like a shadow keeping pace. Lucian Varick's voice didn't need to be present to cut. It echoed the way cruelty does, clean, practiced, and effortless. "I don't accept that, child. You are not worthy of being Luna." Elara could still see the circle of her pack that day, the way they stood around her as if she were something spoiled. She could still feel the stone beneath her bare feet in the courtyard, the way her knees wanted to fold, but pride kept them locked. Her hand had been on her belly, protective, desperate. She had looked at Lucian the way a person looks at the last door in a burning house, begging without wanting to beg. And he had looked back with cold eyes and a chin lifted slightly, as if even meeting her gaze was beneath him. A female voice had drifted out of the crowd, laughing. "Omega," she had said, sweetly mocking. "You really thought you could be Luna?" The whole pack had watched. No one stepped forward. No one said, "This is wrong." Because packs can be many things, but they are rarely brave when it costs them something. Back in the present, Elara bit down so hard she tasted metal. Her eyes stung, not from tears. She didn't have room for tears, but from wind and snow and the raw need to keep moving. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the child in her arms. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. Kael's breath rattled. Elara's world narrowed into a single thought that drowned everything else. If he stops breathing, I die too. His hand slipped off her cloak. A tiny limp slide that no one would notice unless they were a mother. Elara's heart lurched so violently she nearly dropped him. Kael, her voice cracked. No, don't leave me. She stopped in the middle of the forest as if stopping could force the world to pause with her. Snow swirled around her thick and merciless. Trees rose like black pillars on either side, their branches clawing at the sky. Elara sank to her knees, careful as she lowered Kael onto her lap. Her hands shook as she pressed her ear to his chest. For a moment, she couldn't hear anything. Not because there was nothing, because her own blood was roaring too loud in her ears. Then faint. A heartbeat. Thin and distant, like it was coming from the other side of a wall. Elara's breath came out in a strangled sob. Everyone left us, she whispered, rocking him slightly. Everyone. But you don't get to. You hear me? You don't get to leave me. The forest answered with a long, hollow wail of wind between trunks. There are moments, if you've ever been truly cornered, when something inside you snaps. Not your spirit, something else. That last polite piece that still believes the world will behave like the stories said it would. Elara lifted her head. Her eyes changed. The despair didn't disappear. It hardened. It turned sharp around the edges. It became reckless. If there's no way back, she whispered, voice steady. Now then we go forward. She stood, gathered Kael to her chest again, and forced her legs to run. That was when she smelled it. Alpha. Not just any alpha. The scent was heavy enough to press against her senses like a hand. Pine iron, cold stone, old power, the kind that doesn't need shouting. Territory markings appeared, deep claw scores on trees, deliberate and clean. A warning, an announcement. Elara's stomach dropped. Northern Dominion. Even in Lucian's pack, whispered stories about the Northern Alpha were told in careful voices. Not bedtime tales, warnings, the kind that ended with "don't ever go north." Elara knew what stepping deeper meant. It could mean death, but she looked down at Kael, whose breath was now barely more than a shiver against her collarbone, and she made the only decision a mother in her position could make. She went anyway. If anyone can save you, she murmured against Kael's hair, it's him. By the time she reached the outer gates of the Northern Dominion, her legs were numb, and her vision had started to tunnel. The walls rose from the snow like a fortress carved from winter itself. Torches burned along the ramparts, their light wavering orange against the white. Guards appeared before she even reached the main path, fast, silent, and ready. Stop one of them? Barked, stepping in front of her with a blade half drawn. You're trespassing. Elara didn't argue. She didn't have the breath. She dropped to her knees so quickly the impact jarred her bones. Kael's head rolled against her shoulder. Please, she gasped, clutching him tighter. Please help my child. The guard's eyes flicked down to Kael, then back up to her face. Disgust and suspicion lived comfortably there. He's not ours, the guard snapped. I don't need anything, Elara said, shaking her voice, turning ragged with desperation. I don't want shelter. I don't want food. I just need him to live. Another guard stepped forward, voice colder. The Alpha doesn't see outsiders. Elara lifted her chin. Snow clung to her lashes. Her hair was wet and tangled. She knew she looked like exactly what they would hate, weak, starving foreign, but she also knew what she was. A mother. And mothers learn that pride is a luxury you can't afford when your child is dying in your arms. Then tell your Alpha, she said, forcing the words through teeth that were chattering, that an Omega is on her knees at his gate, and she will not leave until someone looks at my son." The guards shifted, uncertain now, because there are rules in packs, and even the cruelest packs know the scent of desperation. It is hard to ignore. It crawls under the skin. Then the air changed. Not the temperature. Something deeper. Everyone around her went still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Footsteps came from behind the gate, measured, heavy, unhurried, the kind of steps that belong to someone who has never had to run. The guards straightened as if a string had been pulled through their spines. Heads dipped, bodies angled away. Elara didn't need to turn to know. Kael Draven. When she did look up, she saw him in the space between torches. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair dusted with snow, eyes like winter sun on ice-cold gold, sharp and too calm. He didn't rush. He didn't soften. He simply looked at her, the way a storm looks at a tree, assessing whether it will break. Elara fought to keep her voice steady. "My alpha," she began, then caught herself. He was not her alpha. He was something worse. "Please," she said instead, and hated how small the words sounded. "Save my child." Kael's gaze dropped to Kael. For 1 second, one heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. A recognition he didn't allow himself to show fully. Then he didn't kneel. He didn't reach for the boy. He stepped past Kael as if the child weren't even there, and walked straight to Elara. My stomach tightened as I imagine it, because this is the moment that makes people rage at the screen. This is the moment your audience leans forward, furious, ready to label him a monster. Elara's lips parted, disbelief breaking through her panic. "My alpha, please, save him first." Kael stopped close enough that his scent flooded her senses, drowning out everything else. Pine and snow, power that made her wolf inside her curl in on itself. He looked down at her, not at the child, at her. His voice was low and flat. "If I save him first," he said, "he dies." Elara blinked as if she hadn't heard correctly. Kael's hand came up, not gentle, not cruel, controlled. He grabbed her by the arm and hauled her up from her knees as if she weighed nothing. Elara stumbled, clinging to Kael with a gasp. "Stop," she hissed, trying to pull away. "What are you doing?" Kael's jaw tightened, and then he leaned down. Elara's world became a single point of burning pain at her throat. She screamed, a raw, shocked sound that ripped through the snowy air and made the guards flinch even though none of them moved. Kael's teeth broke skin. The mark hit like fire. Not just pain, something deeper, a surge, a pull, a snap of connection that made Elara's breath leave her body in a harsh, broken sound. She sagged against him, trembling. Tears sprang to her eyes without permission. "No," she choked, shoving weakly at his chest. "No, you can't." The courtyard had gone deathly silent. One guard's voice cracked. "Alpha." Kael didn't even look at him. Silence. The word wasn't loud, but it slammed down like a command written into bones. Even the guard's throat closed around the rest of the sentence. Somewhere behind them, an elder murmured almost to himself, a rejected Omega claimed. Elara's hands shook as she clutched Kael tighter. Her neck burned. Her skin felt too hot, too alive. The mark pulsed like it had its own heartbeat. Kael finally turned his head slightly, just enough to speak to the healer who had arrived at the edge of the crowd, eyes wide. "Take the child," Kael ordered. "Save him. Now." The healer moved instantly. Elara flinched, clutching Kael so hard he gave a weak whimper. "No," she cried, voice breaking. "Don't take him, don't." Guard stepped forward, firm and unkind, prying her arms apart, just enough for the healer to lift Kael away. "If you want him to live," the guard said sharply, "you'll stay quiet." Elara reached after her son, fingers scraping air. Kael, the child's eyes fluttered. His lips parted. No sound came out. And then he was gone, carried into the fortress, swallowed by its gates. Elara staggered, one hand flying to her throat. The mark burned, and with it came another sensation that made her freeze. A wave of emotion, dark and sharp, slammed into her chest. It wasn't hers, it was anger, not wild, controlled, restrained so tightly it felt like steel. Kael. Alara's eyes widened as she realized it, and she hated it instantly. Hated that she could feel him. Hated that he was inside her now. She swayed. Kael didn't catch her, not immediately. He watched, expression unreadable, as if testing whether she would fall. Then he turned away as if she were a matter already handled. "Bring her inside," he said. Elara tried to lunge forward. "Where is my son?" Kael didn't answer. He didn't even look back. And that silence, more than the mark, more than the pain, was what convinced Elara she had made the worst mistake of her life. The doors of the manor closed behind her with a heavy finality. The heat inside made her skin prickle after the frozen air outside. Torches lined the corridors, their light catching on stone and iron. Voices whispered in pockets as people saw her pass, their gazes sharp and curious and hostile. Elara was shoved into a chamber and the door shut. For a moment, she stood in the middle of it, breathing hard, trying to convince herself she was still in control of her body. Her throat throbbed, the mark pulsed. She pressed her palm against it, tears slipping down her cheeks, silent and angry. "He didn't save us," she whispered into the empty room. "He trapped me. And then, because the universe has a cruel sense of timing, her body betrayed her." A tremor ran through her legs. Her vision blurred. She slid to the floor. The last thought she had before darkness took her was simple, bitter, and sharp as ice. "I escaped one monster, only to fall into the hands of another." What do you think made our alpha mark that woman right in front of everyone? Was it power, destiny, or something even darker? Let me know your theory in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe before we dive into the most intense part of the story. When Elara woke, she didn't know how much time had passed. The room was dim, warmed by a roaring fire in a stone hearth. Her body felt heavy. Her throat still burned, but the pain had shifted into something deeper, like a brand settling into skin. She sat up sharply, panic punching through her exhaustion. Till her voice came out hoarse. A woman in a simple servant's dress stepped forward quickly. "My lady, please don't." Elara swung her legs over the side of the bed, nearly falling as her knees wobbled. "Where is my child?" The servant flinched at the harshness, then lowered her eyes. "He's in the healing wing. Healer Arendor is with him." Elara froze. The words healing wing hit differently than she expected. Not dungeon, not execution hall, not outside in the snow where they'd leave a foreign child to die. Her chest tightened, relief and suspicion fighting for space. "If anything happens to him," Elara said, voice trembling with restrained fury, "I will tear this place apart. I don't care if I die doing it." The servant swallowed. "Healer Arendor is the best we have. The Alpha ordered it himself." The Alpha, Elara spat, touching her throat again. "He ordered my child saved after he, her fingers shook against the mark. Heat spread into her skin like a slow poison. The servant hesitated. "Do you need water?" Elara's laugh was sharp and humorless. "I need my son." She pushed past the servant and stumbled into the corridor. The manor was a world built for power. Tall ceilings, thick doors, stone floors that didn't echo underfoot so much as absorb sound like secrets. Elara walked like someone who didn't belong, too thin, too tense, too ready to flinch at every shadow. Whispers followed her. "Is that her, the Omega? She's marked." Why would he? Elara kept her head up, but each word was a needle because she knew what they were thinking. A foreign Omega, rejected, claimed. A scandal walking through their halls. Down in the great hall, the northern pack gathered like storm clouds. Torak the head guard stood with arms crossed, jaw tight. Elders sat along the stone benches, their faces carved into disapproval. Morel Voss. First Beta stood slightly apart, watchful, quiet, her eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. Kael Draven stood at the front, unmoving, unbothered. Torak spoke first voice, carrying through the hall. My alpha. Keeping her here is a risk. An elder snapped. Claiming her in front of everyone was unprecedented. Another finished with clear accusation. Morel said nothing, but her gaze flicked once briefly to Kael's hands, as if checking whether they were clenched. Kael's eyes didn't change. Speak your concerns, he said. Torak lifted his chin. She carries another pack's scent. She could be bait, a trap. She's an Omega. Someone muttered disdainful. What harm can she do? Kael's gaze cut toward that speaker so fast the hall went colder. Pressure slammed down, not physical but primal, the kind of alpha dominance that makes lungs forget how to breathe. The speaker dropped to one knee, choking. Kael's voice was quiet. Say that again. No one spoke. Morel's eyes narrowed slightly. Torak swallowed and tried again, more carefully. My alpha. The laws. If her former pack demands her return, Kael cut him off. They won't. And if they do, an elder pressed. Kael's answer was simple. She is under my protection. The words landed like a blade. Murmurs stirred. Outrage, shock. Torak's jaw flexed, but Kael stepped forward. One pace, and that was enough to end the argument. Anyone who touches her, Kael said voice low, challenges me. Silence fell like snow on a grave. And up in the corridor, Elara stopped short because the mark at her throat flared, and suddenly she wasn't alone in her own body. A surge of emotion hit her chest, anger, restraint, something sharp and dangerous held behind iron control. Elara's breath caught. That's not mine, she whispered, pressing her hand to the mark. She felt him. Kael, not his thoughts. Thank whatever gods still listened, but his emotion pulsing through the bond like a warning. It made her stomach twist, because if she could feel this, what else would she feel later? Down the corridor, her knees went weak for a different reason. Fear, yes, but also the strange, unwanted certainty that Kael Draven was not indifferent. He was watching, even when she couldn't see him. Elara forced herself to move, guided by servants who kept a careful distance. When they reached the healing wing, the scent hit her first. Herbs, warm water, metal tools cleaned with alcohol, the sharp, clean smell of medicine. She rushed in, and there Kael was. Small body under blankets, cheeks pale, lips cracked, a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. Elara healer Arendor said, voice calm but firm. Slowly, Elara didn't slow. She crossed the room in 3 stumbling steps and fell to her knees beside the bed, clutching Kael's hand. Kael, she whispered, voice breaking, baby, I'm here. His eyelids fluttered. Mama. He breathed the sound so weak it tore a sob from her chest. Elara bowed her head over his hand. I'm here. I won't leave you again. Behind her, the air changed. Kael entered. Elara's body reacted before her mind did, shoulders tightening, spine stiffening instinctively, angling herself between him and her child, as if she could block a storm with her own body. Kael said nothing at first. He simply looked. Elara lifted her chin, eyes blazing. Stay away from him. Kael's gaze slid to her throat, brief, unreadable, then to Kael. The child, half awake, turned his head, and instead of fear, Kael's expression softened. He reached out, a tiny hand extended toward Kael like it belonged there. Elara's breath hitched. Kael no Kael didn't step back. He moved slowly, controlled, like approaching a wounded animal. He crouched beside the bed close enough for Kael's fingers to brush his sleeve. Kael blinked sleepily up at him. "You're not scary." Elara froze. The room froze. Even Arendor stopped moving for a heartbeat. Kael's voice remained small but certain. You smell like home. If you want a moment that bends an audience in half, it's that one. Because no matter how angry you are at Kael for what he did, a child doesn't fake that kind of certainty. And Elara hears it like a crack in the wall she's built around her heart. Kael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Something moved in his eyes so fast you'd miss it if you weren't watching for it. Elara's swallowed voice shaking with confusion. "What are you saying?" Kael yawned, eyelids drooping. "Home." Kael's hand hovered near the child's hair, then stopped as if he didn't trust himself to touch. Arendor cleared his throat softly. "The boy's condition is unusual." Elara's head snapped toward him. Unusual how Arendor's gaze was steady. "This is not only a wound." Elara's stomach dropped. "Don't say that." Arendor didn't soften his words. "His body is rejecting something." Elara stared. Rejecting what Arendor looked at Kael, then back to Elara. "His blood?" Elara went cold. "That doesn't make sense." "It does," Arendor said, voice low. "In rare cases." Elara's fingers tightened around Kael's hand. "Explain." Arendor's face was grave. "This is bloodline rejection." Elara blinked. "What it happens?" Arendor continued when a child carries an alpha bloodline, but is cut off from the protection of that bloodline. Elara's breath stuttered. Her mind raced, scrambling for logic, his father. She stopped, because saying Lucian out loud suddenly felt uncertain. Arendor's eyes didn't flinch. "His father is not the male who rejected you." Elara's body went rigid. The room seemed to tilt. Kael's gaze sharpened, watching her, as if weighing every micro-expression. Elara's voice came out thin. "That's impossible." But the word impossible didn't hold the same strength it used to nod after a mark that shouldn't exist, and a child who called a stranger home. A memory flashed a night years ago, when Elara had been alone in the woods, terrified, wounded. A shadow moving through snow, a scent like pine in winter. Her stomach twisted. Kael's scent. Elara took a step back without realizing it. No. Kael didn't move, but Elara felt him through the mark, something dark and coiled, held tight. Morel's voice came from the doorway, sharp as a blade. "Healer?" Arendor didn't look away from Elara. "I don't speak without certainty." Elara's gaze flicked to Kael, eyes wide. You knew?" Kael's answer was quiet. "I wasn't sure." The honesty in that cold and blunt hit harder than a lie would have. Elara shook her head, voice rising. "Then why did you mark me? Why did you?" Kael stepped closer, and Elara flinched despite herself. His voice dropped. "Because if I didn't, your son would have died." Elara's throat tightened. "So you did it to save him?" Kael's gaze held hers. "Yes." "And what about me?" Elara whispered, the anger bleeding into something raw. "Did you save me, or did you claim me because it was convenient?" Kael didn't answer right away. That silence is important, because it's where your romance begins, not with softness, not with flirting, but with the brutal reality that sometimes love grows in the space between fear and truth. Kael finally spoke, each word measured. "I didn't claim you for convenience." Elara's eyes burned. Then for what? Kael looked down at Kael, at the child's tiny hand still touching his sleeve. His voice was lower now, and if you listened carefully, you could hear the edge of something he didn't want anyone to notice. "I don't know yet," he said. Elara stared, disarmed by the honesty. Kael turned away abruptly as if the moment had exposed too much. Healer, he said to Arendor, do what you need to do. Arendor nodded. He needs rest and warmth and stability. Kael's eyes flicked back to Elara. He stays here tonight. Alara's shoulders stiffened. And me? Kael's gaze hardened. You stay where I can keep you both alive. Alara's laugh was sharp bitter. So I'm a prisoner. Kael's jaw clenched. If you call survival a prison, then yes. He left, and the moment he did, the pressure inside, Elara eased, but the bond didn't. The mark still burned softly like a reminder. Elara sat beside Kael for hours, listening to the rise and fall of his breathing, watching his color return slowly under the blankets. And when Kael stirred in the night, half asleep, he murmured, "Mama, don't be scared." Elara swallowed hard. I'm not, she lied, because she was. Not just of Kael Draven, but of the truth that was starting to form in the cracks between her memories. The next morning, Elara found herself in the courtyard as servants brought warm broth and clean cloth. She moved like a ghost through a world that didn't know what to do with her. Some eyes hostile, some curious, all of them aware of the mark at her throat. And Kael was always there, not beside her, not comforting her, but present, a shadow at the edge of her vision, a wall between her and anyone who looked too bold. When a servant stumbled and nearly spilled hot water near Kael, Elara reacted instantly, pulling the child back. Kyle's head snapped up. His emotion hit her through the mark like a wave-sharp alarm, immediate violence held back by discipline. Elara froze. Kyle's gaze met hers across the courtyard, and for one breath they were connected in a way neither of them wanted to admit. Then he looked away, as if he could pretend it meant nothing. But that night when Kael slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Kael stood in the doorway of the healing room and watched him for a long, silent time. Arendor spoke softly beside him. He trusts you. Kael didn't move. He shouldn't. He does anyway. Kael's eyes narrowed, distant. I've seen war. I've seen enemies. I've seen betrayal. Arendor waited. Kael's voice lowered to something almost private, but I've never seen a child look at me like that. Arendor's expression softened slightly, because he recognizes what his blood recognizes. Kael's throat worked. He stepped closer to the bed slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might break the fragile peace. Kael's hand lay open on the blanket. Kael reached out, hesitated, then let his knuckles brush the child's fingers, barely a touch. Kael didn't wake. He simply curled his hands slightly instinctively, closing around that contact. Kael went still. Kael's gaze lifted, and across the room he saw Elara in the doorway watching. Her eyes were no longer filled with pure hatred. They were filled with something worse: confusion, hurt, and a question she hadn't asked out loud yet, but that hung in the air like a blade. Did you choose me, or did you only claim me because of him? Kael looked back down at Kael, his expression tightening. Then he whispered so quietly it was almost lost in the crackle of the fire. This child is not an accident. And Elara heard him. And in that moment, she knew the world she'd tried to run away from had already caught up. Not through Lucian, not through exile, but through the one alpha she'd never meant to meet, whose mark now burned on her skin, like destiny refusing to be ignored. Kael Draven didn't sleep. He stood on the balcony outside his private study, bare hands resting on the frozen stone rail as snow drifted past like silent ash. The wind was sharp enough to slice, yet it never reached him the way it reached everyone else. Cold was a sensation for ordinary wolves. For Kael, winter was simply the natural state of the world, an old companion that had never once asked him to be anything other than hard. Below the northern dominion lay quiet under moonlight. The fortress roofs wore white crowns. Watchfires pulsed along the walls like steady heartbeats. Everything looked controlled, stable, obedient, and yet Kael felt something inside him that didn't fit order. A pressure beneath his ribs, a pull at the base of his throat. The mark. Not the one he had given. He had done that 1,000 times in battle, in law, in punishment, in command. No, this was something else. This was the mark inside him, the one the wolf recognized before the man could think. It was dangerous, because Kael had built his life on one rule: never let the wolf lead without permission. But when he had stood at the gate and seen her, Elara kneeling with a dying child in her arms, something had cracked that rule like thin ice. He closed his eyes, and the memory came anyway. Not the recent one, the gate, the crowd, the cries, something older, something buried beneath years of war and discipline. A night at the border, a field of black snow, stained dark where bodies had fallen. The world had been loud with metal bone rage. He had shifted too early, too violently, because there had been too much blood in the air and too much enemy scent pressing in. He remembered claws tearing through flesh. He remembered the taste of iron. He remembered the moment his wolf stopped distinguishing friend from foe. Then something changed. A scent. Not fear, not challenge. Warm, soft. It cut through his frenzy like a blade wrapped in velvet. The wolf had snapped its head toward it, as if commanded by something older than instinct. Kael saw it now as if through fog. A girl collapsed in the snow, bleeding, barely alive. Her hair clung to her face. Her eyes were wide and unfocused. She smelled like winter flowers crushed under ice. He remembered moving toward her fast, hungry, furious at everything. Then the memory broke apart. He couldn't see what happened next. He only remembered waking later in human form with torn clothes, blood on his hands, and a cold emptiness in his chest he couldn't name. Kael's fingers tightened on the stone rail. "What did I do?" he whispered into the wind. Behind him, the study door creaked. Morel Voss stepped out without announcement because a first beta did not ask permission to worry. "My alpha," she said softly. Kael didn't turn. "If you've come to lecture me again, don't." Morel joined him at the rail, keeping a respectful distance. Her gaze was sharp, but her tone remained measured. "I came to tell you the pack is restless. Half of them think you've lost your mind." Kael's mouth twisted. Only half Morel's eyes flicked to his throat, then back to his face. She rarely showed emotion, but tonight a hint of concern softened her features. "This bond is stronger than ordinary." Kael's jaw flexed. "I didn't ask you to analyze it." "No," Morel agreed. "You don't ask, you command. That's why I'm worried." Kael finally looked at her. Worried for what Morel hesitated, then chose honesty, the kind of honesty only a beta who had survived Kael's storms would dare to give. "Worried that you're not the only one being pulled by it." Kael's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Morel nodded toward the corridor beyond where the healing wing lay. "The Omega. Elara. She's walking through this manor like a knife in a room full of hungry wolves. Someone will test her. Someone will try. And when that happens..." Kael felt it again, the flare in his chest that wasn't his own. A sharp, restrained fury. "She'll be fine," he said too quickly. Morel watched him. "You say that, but your wolf says something else." Kael didn't respond, because his wolf was already pacing inside him, restless, listening to the bond like it was a drum. Morel lowered her voice. "My alpha. What is she to you?" Kael's gaze shifted to the snow-covered rooftops below. "She's under my protection." "That's a law answer," Morel said. "I'm asking for the truth." Kael's throat tightened. He wasn't used to being asked for truth in the emotional sense. He was used to being asked for truth in the sense of strategy, policy, war. "She is..." He stopped. He heard himself breathe. Then, without wanting to, he admitted something dangerous. She is the only thing I cannot explain. Morelle's expression didn't change much, but something in her eyes softened, like she had been expecting this answer and hoping she was wrong. She bowed her head slightly. Then you'd better decide what you want before the world forces your hand. When Morelle left, Kael remained on the balcony until dawn, bled pale over the horizon. And far below in the healing wing, Elara didn't sleep either. Elara sat beside Kael's bed, her hands wrapped around his small fingers, as if she could anchor his spirit to his body by sheer will. The fire in the hearth popped softly. Somewhere beyond the stone walls, the northern wind howled. Kael's breathing was steadier now, but still fragile. Every time his chest rose, Elara felt relief. Every time it fell, she panicked that it wouldn't rise again. She had lived like this too long, on the edge of losing him. A healer's assistant had brought her a cup of broth earlier, but she hadn't touched it. Hunger was a distant thing compared to fear. When the room finally quieted and the last healer stepped out, Elara let her head bow toward her son. Her throat still burned where Kael had marked her. The mark pulsed faintly like a second heartbeat, and it didn't let her forget. She touched it lightly and hissed at the sting. Heat spread into her skin, too intimate, too wrong. It made her feel claimed even when she was alone. She hated it. She hated him. And yet there were cracks in her hatred now, because Kael had ordered Kael saved, because Kael's presence had made the pack go silent as if their cruelty had been caged by his shadow. Because Kael had looked at Kael and said, "You smell like home." Elara pressed her palm to her forehead. What does that even mean? A memory flickered at the edge of her mind, slippery as ice, a night, a forest, pain, a scent like pine and snow. She lifted her head slowly. The same scent clung to this manor, faint, but present everywhere, Kael's signature threaded into the very stones. Elara's stomach twisted. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling, whispering into the dark, as if the dark might answer honestly, "If you're his, then whose am I?" That was when she felt it again. A wave of emotion slamming into her chest through the bond. Not anger this time, not tension, something else. A quiet heaviness like a burden carried too long, like a man standing alone in cold, refusing warmth because he doesn't trust it. Elara's breath caught. It wasn't her grief, it was his. She went still, shocked by the intimacy of it. She had expected dominance through the bond, not loneliness. The realization disturbed her more than anything else, because monsters didn't feel loneliness. Monsters didn't carry sadness so tightly it became discipline. Elara's fingers tightened around Kael's hand. "Stop," she whispered fiercely to the bond, to Kael, to herself. "Stop making me feel things I don't want." Kael stirred, his eyes cracked open, hazy with sleep. Mama Elara leaned forward instantly. "I'm here." He blinked slowly, then whispered, half asleep, "Don't be scared." Elara smiled tightly, forcing calm into her voice. "I'm not." Kael's eyelids drooped again. "He won't hurt you." Elara's heart stuttered. Who Kael didn't answer. He drifted back into sleep. Elara sat there in silence, listening to the fire, feeling the bond pulse faintly at her throat like a warning or a promise. Over the next few days, the manor became both sanctuary and battlefield. Elara was no longer a stranger in the way outsiders usually were, because strangers could be ignored. She was worse. She was marked. That meant she was noticed. Servants bowed too deeply when she passed, fearful of treating her wrong. Guards watched her with wary eyes, as if expecting her to do something treacherous, simply because she wasn't theirs. Elders stared with disapproval that had nothing to do with her actions and everything to do with what she represented. Elara kept her head high, not because she felt strong, but because she had learned what happens when you look weak. People decide you deserve what comes. One morning, when Kael was strong enough to leave the healing wing, Elara wrapped him in a heavy cloak the servants had provided. It was too fine for her comfort, but it was warm, and her priority was always her child. They stepped into a wide corridor leading toward an inner courtyard. Kael clung to her hand, his small steps, cautious eyes bright with curiosity despite everything he had endured. "Mama," he whispered, "this place is big." Elara forced a soft tone. "Yes, it's different." Kael looked up at her. "Do we live here now?" Elara swallowed. "I don't know, love." A guard rounded the corner ahead and stopped abruptly when he saw her. His expression tightened. "You're not allowed in that wing." Elara paused. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. The Alpha's private grounds are restricted." The guard interrupted, voice sharp. "Turn around." Kael's fingers tightened around hers. Elara felt anger flare. "My son needs air. He's been in a sickbed for days." The guard's gaze flicked down to Kael, then away. "Not my concern." Alara's chest burned. She opened her mouth to fight back, and the air changed. Kael's scent hit first like winter's shadow stretching over the hallway. The guard stiffened so fast it was almost comical. Kael stepped into view, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at Elara at first, he looked at the guard. "Move," Kael said quietly. The guard swallowed. My alpha Kael's gaze sharpened. "Move." The guard stepped back, immediately bowing his head. "Yes, my alpha." Kael's eyes shifted to Elara. She met them without lowering her gaze, even though every instinct in her screamed to. "I didn't ask for special treatment." Kael's voice was calm. "I didn't give you special treatment. I gave you permission." Alara's jaw tightened. "You didn't have to." Kael stepped aside, allowing her a clear path forward. "I didn't ask if you wanted it." His tone wasn't harsh. It was matter of fact. Yet somehow that made it more infuriating. Elara led Kael past him, refusing to flinch. But as she passed, she felt his emotion through the bond, like a hand brushing the back of her neck. Not desire, not possession. A sharp alertness, protective, vigilant, as if he had been waiting for the moment someone tried to stop her. Elara hated that part of herself that noticed. It was Kael, as always, who shattered the tension. 2 days later, he was well enough to wander into the training courtyard, drawn by the sound of clashing blades and the deep thud of sparring bodies hitting the ground. Elara followed, nervous. Training grounds were where wolves proved dominance, where weakness was tested, where an outsider's child might become an easy target for cruelty. She expected Kael to be absent, busy with council strategy, the 1,000 responsibilities of an alpha. But he was there. He stood near the edge of the yard, coat open, at the throat, arms crossed, as he watched young warriors train. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everyone trained harder under his gaze. Kael slipped from Alara's grasp. Before she could stop him, his feet carrying him forward with a confidence he didn't have anywhere else. "Hey, Elara," hissed, reaching. "Kael, come back." Kael didn't. He ran straight toward Kael Draven and stopped inches from him, looking up with wide eyes. "You," Kael said simply. The training yard fell quiet in a ripple, heads turned, bodies stilled mid-motion. Alara's stomach dropped. Kael looked down at the child. His expression didn't soften, but his attention sharpened in a way that made the air feel heavier. Kael tilted his head. "Can you teach me Alara's breath caught?" Someone nearby whispered, scandalized. "He's talking to the alpha like that?" Kael's eyes remained on Kael. "Teach you what?" Kael frowned, searching for the right words. "My wolf, it's weak. I can't hear it sometimes." Elara hurried forward, hand outstretched. Kael stopped bothering. Kael lifted one hand, not looking away from Kael. The gesture wasn't aggressive, but it was unmistakable. Don't interrupt. Elara froze. Kael crouched, slowly bringing himself level with the child. The sight and alpha of Kael's stature, lowering himself for a small boy, silenced the yard more completely than any roar could have. Kael spoke quietly. Don't be afraid of your wolf. Kael's lower lip trembled. But it's small. Kael's gaze didn't waver. Small doesn't mean gone. He placed his palm gently over Kael's chest, just above the heart. Kael startled at first, then went still as if something in him recognized the touch. Kael closed his eyes. His voice dropped lower, softer. Listen. Elara stood at the edge of the courtyard, heart pounding, unable to move. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Kael to know how to be gentle. Because men like him in the stories weren't gentle. They were conquerors. They were rulers. They were wolves who didn't need softness to survive. But here he was, hand steady, voice calm, teaching a child to breathe. Kael inhaled, exhaled. Kael's hand remained on his chest like an anchor. Again, Kael murmured. Kael breathed again. His face changed, subtle but real. His shoulders lowered, his eyes focused. Kael opened his eyes. Do you feel it? Kael nodded slowly, awe creeping into his expression. It's there, just quiet. Kael's mouth tightened as if holding back a reaction. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Kael blinked up at him. How do you know? Kael hesitated for the first time. Then he answered with a truth that sounded like it came from somewhere painful. Because I've spent my whole life being quiet. The words hit Elara like a sudden crack in ice. Kael stood stepping back to give Kael space. Kael swayed slightly, then grinned as if proud of himself for surviving something invisible. Elara's throat tightened. She saw Kael's eyes follow Kael for a long second. And in that gaze, there was something dangerously human, something like longing. And in that moment, Elara's certainty cracked. He's not who I thought he was. But then the other memory crashed back, teeth at her throat, the mark, the pain, the helplessness. Two images battling inside her. The alpha who claimed her without permission. The alpha who taught her son how to breathe. Elara clenched her hands into fists so hard her nails bit her palms. Who are you? She whispered to herself. What are you? Kael's gaze lifted, and for one heartbeat it met hers across the courtyard. The bond flared. Elara felt it like a pulse in her blood, Kael's awareness of her. Not as a possession, as a presence. It made her chest ache, which made her furious because she refused to ache for a man like him. 2 nights later, healer Arendor requested both Kael and Elara in the healing wing. Elara entered with unease coiled in her belly. Kael was asleep, finally safe in the adjacent room, with a guard outside the door. Kael's guard, not hers. Kael stood near the hearth, posture relaxed, but eyes sharp as if he expected trouble even in a healer's room. Arendor didn't waste time. He held a small vial of blood up to the light, his expression grim. I tested the boy again, Arendor said. Elara crossed her arms, trying to keep her voice steady. Say what you need to say. Arendor's gaze flicked to Kael. His blood matches the alpha's. The world stopped. Elara stared, the words failing to make sense. No. Kael didn't move. But Elara felt the shift in him through the bond, a tightening, a darkening, like a storm forming beneath ice. Arendor continued, relentless in his honesty. It's not speculation, it's certainty. Elara took a step back as if the floor had suddenly tilted. That's impossible? Kael's eyes remained on her, unreadable. Is it? Elara shook her head violently. Kael's father is Lucian. Arendor cut her off. No. The word landed like a slap. Elara's voice rose, cracking with desperation. You don't get to rewrite my life with a vial of blood. Kael's tone stayed calm, which was somehow worse. Then tell me why your son recognized me before he recognized safety. Alara's breath caught. She remembered Kael's voice. You smell like home. Arendor set the vial down gently, as if trying to soften the blow with politeness. The bloodline rejection, it only begins to heal when the child is pulled back under his true alpha's protection. Alara's hands trembled. She looked at Kael, and suddenly the mark at her throat felt heavier. Not just a brand, a connection, a path. Kael stepped closer, slow and controlled. That night he said, voice low, you weren't alone. Elara froze, every muscle locking. Kael's eyes didn't leave her face. I was there. A memory shattered in Alara's mind, snow and pain, and the scent of pine, the warmth of a body bending over her, a voice she couldn't remember, but a presence she could never forget. She whispered broken, it was you. Kael didn't deny it. Yes. Alara's eyes burned. Did you know? When you marked me at the gate, did you know he was yours? Kael's answer came immediately blunt as truth. No. Elara blinked, caught off guard. Kael's hand rose not to touch her, but to gesture toward the mark on her throat. That wasn't a decision. Elara's voice went thin. Then what was it? Kael's gaze hardened, not with cruelty, but with the intensity of someone admitting something he hates admitting. My wolf recognized you before I did. Elara swallowed. Recognized me. As what Kael's jaw flexed. He didn't answer with a romantic phrase. He didn't soften it into a confession. He said the word like it was both a weapon and a vow. Mate. Elara's breath hitched. Kael's voice dropped. And the child, my wolf recognized him too. Arendor cleared his throat softly, as if reminding them he existed. It explains the strength of the bond. It explains why the Alpha reacted so violently when anyone insulted her. It explains why the boy's condition improved so rapidly once the mark was placed. Elara's knees felt weak. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. And, Lucian, she whispered, voice cracking. He said. Kael's eyes turned cold, the kind of cold that belongs to kings. Lucian used you. Elara flinched as if struck. Kael's voice remained controlled, but Elara could feel the rage beneath it through the bond. He rejected you because he thought the child wasn't his, because he feared what it would mean if it belonged to someone stronger. Elara's throat tightened until she could barely breathe. So, all of it, my exile, my shame, was because he was afraid. Kael stepped closer again, and this time he did touch her, just barely, fingertips brushing her wrist. It was the smallest contact, but it carried weight. You survived, Kael said. That matters. Elara stared at him, raw emotion shaking in her eyes. So you didn't choose me. Your wolf did. Kael's hand fell away. He didn't deny it, and that his refusal to dress it up hurt more than a lie would have. Elara's voice became a whisper. So tell me the truth. Kael's eyes held hers. Elara asked the question that had been tearing at her since the night Kael reached for him. Did you claim me because you wanted me, or because you needed to save your son? Kael didn't answer. Silence filled the room, thick as snow, because the truth was complicated, and complicated truths don't fit neatly into the kind of romance stories people want. But the best stories, the ones that stick, are rarely neat. Elara's shoulders trembled, not from fear, from grief, from the realization that her life had been rearranged by forces she never saw coming. She took a shaky breath, then turned away. I need to see Kael, she said, voice tight. Kael didn't stop her, but Elara felt it, the pull of his gaze, the weight of his presence, the quiet panic under his control. and that too was terrifying, because it meant he cared, even if he didn't know why. The next morning, the horns sounded. Not training horns, warning horns. Elara was in Kael's room, helping him sip warm tea when the manor shook with urgency. Boots thundered in hallways, voices shouted commands. Kael's eyes widened. "Mama!" Alara's stomach dropped. She recognized chaos when she heard it. She pushed him behind her instinctively. "Stay close." The door burst open, not violently, but urgently, and Morel stepped in, face tense. "Elara," she said quickly, "bring the child, now." Alara's heart hammered. "What's happening?" Morel's jaw tightened. "You're past." They moved through corridors crowded with guards. Elara clutched Kael's hand, feeling his fingers tremble. The closer they got to the great hall, the stronger a familiar scent became one that made Alara's stomach turn with instinctive hatred. The main doors opened, and there he was. Lucien Verrick strode into the hall like he still owned the world, dressed in dark furs, flanked by wolves from Elara's former pack. His smile was sharp and arrogant, the kind that had once convinced Elara she was safe. Now it just looked like rot. Lucien's eyes landed on her, and his grin widened. "I thought you died," he said, voice loud enough for the entire hall to hear. Elara's hand tightened around Kael's. "Why are you here?" Lucien tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "To retrieve what belongs to me." His gaze shifted to Kael. Kael stiffened instinctively, pressing closer to Elara's side. Elara's skin crawled. "He's not yours." Lucien chuckled. "Isn't he the pack law says the child of an Omega belongs to her pack? And you, Elara, were mine." Elara's blood ran cold at the casual cruelty in his voice. Lucien stepped closer, projecting his voice so everyone heard. "A rejected Omega wandering into another Alpha's domain and pretending to be Luna." He laughed. "How desperate can you be?" Murmurs rippled through the northern pack. Elara felt eyes on her, judging, curious, uncertain. Lucien turned, addressing them like an entertainer. "Do you know what she is? She was trash I threw away." Elara's face burned. She forced her voice steady. "I am not your trash." Lucien's smile sharpened. "You've never belonged to anyone, not even yourself." Kael's fingers trembled in Elara's grip. Elara swallowed her rage, leaned down, and whispered to Kael, "Don't listen. Stay with me." Lucien's gaze flicked down to the child. "Come here," he said, voice turning falsely gentle. "I'll take you back where you belong." Kael didn't move. He didn't even look at Lucien. He looked past him toward the raised platform where Kael stood. Kael Draven's presence filled the hall without effort. He hadn't spoken yet, but his eyes were locked on Lucien with the calm focus of a predator that has already decided how this ends. An elder stepped forward cautiously. "Alpha Kael." "This is a matter of law." Torak added tense. "By law, she is of another pack." Another voice, uncertain, murmured, "We can't make an enemy of Varric." Elara's throat tightened. She hated this. The way packs turned law into a weapon against the weak. Morel stood off to the side, watching unreadable. Kael finally moved. He stepped down from the platform, boots echoing against stone. The hall fell silent like someone had snuffed out sound. Kael stopped in front of Lucien, close enough that their scents clashed pine and winter against smoke and arrogance. Lucien smirked. "So this is the famous Northern Alpha?" Kael's voice was steady. "You came to claim what is no longer yours." Lucien laughed. "She was never yours. She was mine to reject." Kael took one step forward. His voice dropped dangerous. "You rejected a female carrying my blood." Lucien's smile faltered for the first time. Elara felt the hall tense. She felt the pack lean forward, hungry for the truth. Lucien tried to recover, scoffing. Your blood don't be ridiculous. She crawled back to you because she needed shelter, and you, his eyes flicked to Elara's throat. You marked her because you wanted a toy. Elara flinched, shame and fury warring inside her. Kael's gaze didn't leave Lucian. His voice was calm, colder than snow. I did not pick her up from the ground like a discarded thing. Lucian sneered. Then what did you do? Kael turned slightly, his eyes finding Elara, and in that look, Elara felt something shift. Not a command, not ownership, a choice. Kael's voice carried through the hall like a vow carved into stone. I chose her. The words struck the room silent. Lucian's mouth twisted. You chose a rejected Omega. Kael didn't blink. Yes, Lucian's laugh was strained now. You're lying. Kael lifted his chin. I claimed my Luna. Alara's breath caught. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Because those words, my Luna, were not necessary for law. Not necessary for threat, not necessary for war. They were necessary for something else. For her. Lucian's face darkened. Then you're declaring war? Kael's eyes gleamed like winter sun. You brought war to my door. Lucian's body tensed. Fine. And then he shifted. Bones cracked. Fur erupted. The hall's air filled with the scent of aggression. Northern guards surged forward, then halted at Kael's raised hand. Kael shifted in one smooth motion faster than most could track. In an instant, a massive black wolf stood where the alpha had been silver, streaking his fur like lightning frozen mid-strike. The two wolves collided. The sound was thunder on stone. Claws scraped, teeth flashed. Snow and grit flew as bodies slammed into pillars and slid across the floor. Elara was shoved back by guards trying to clear the hall. Kael stumbled. A wolf from Lucian's side broke formation, not aiming for Kael, but aiming for the weak point, aiming for Kael. Elara saw it a second too late. A gray wolf lunged, jaws open. Elara threw herself in front of Kael without thinking. Her body moved on instinct the way mothers do when danger reaches for their child. No. The wolf's teeth snapped inches from her arm. Guards grabbed at it, but it was fast, trained for violence. Elara pushed Kael behind her arms, spread trembling but unmoving. The wolf snarled, eyes wild. You think you can protect him? It mocked, voice distorted as it shifted, partially human enough for speech. Elara's voice shook, but her eyes didn't. I don't need to be stronger than you, she hissed. I only need to stand in front of him. The attacker lunged again. This time Kael was pulled forward by the chaos, his small body yanked toward the wolf's jaws. Elara's heart stopped. Kael. She dove, wrapping her arms around him, turning her body to shield him completely. The world narrowed to one brutal thought. If something has to die here, it will be me. She squeezed her eyes shut, felt the rush of air, waited for pain. Instead, an earth-shaking roar ripped through the hall. Not Lucian's, Kael's. The sound was pure fury, primal, unrestrained. It wasn't the voice of a ruler. It was the voice of a mate, of a father. Kael's wolf slammed into the attacker with such force that the creature flew across the hall and hit a pillar hard enough to crack stone. Kael stood over Elara and Kael like a wall of black fur and silver streaks, teeth-bared eyes burning gold. His body trembled not from fear but from barely contained violence. For a second, the entire hall froze, even Lucian's wolves pausing as if their instincts told them they had just witnessed something ancient waking up. Kael's wolf turned its head toward Lucian. A warning, a promise. Lucian's wolf snarled, but the confidence was gone now. He could feel it too, the difference between fighting a rival and provoking a force that no longer cared about rules. Kael lunged. The final clash was brutal and swift. Kael's wolf moved like a storm, driving Lucian back, tearing at his defenses, forcing him to yield with sheer dominance. Lucian crashed onto the ground, shifting back to human with a gasp, blood streaking his mouth, not enough to be graphic, but enough to make the message clear. He was beaten. Kael shifted back as well, standing over him, chest rising and falling slowly. His eyes were cold. Lucian laughed, weakly, coughing. You're just a slave to instinct. Kael's voice was quiet, deadly. At least I don't deny my own blood. Lucian's smile faded, because that was the truth that destroyed him. He had rejected what he feared. Kael had claimed what he would protect. Guards dragged Lucian back as he struggled weakly, spitting curses that no longer carried power. Silence flooded the hall. Elara remained on the floor, arms still wrapped around Kael, trembling so violently she could barely breathe. Kael approached slowly. This time he didn't touch her immediately. He stopped a few steps away, as if giving her space to decide whether she wanted him close. That choice, small as it was, hit Elara harder than the mark ever did. Kael lifted his head from Elara's shoulder. His eyes found Kael, his lips parted, and in a voice so small it barely carried, he said the word that changed everything. Papa. The hall held its breath. Kael froze. For the first time since Elara met him, his control cracked, not into rage, but into something raw and stunned. His eyes softened just for a moment, so fast it could be missed. But Elara saw it. Kael lowered himself to one knee, closer now, still careful. Are you hurt? He asked, voice quiet. Kael shook his head slowly. Mama saved me. Kael's gaze lifted to Elara. Not cold, not possessive, grateful. Alara's throat tightened. She didn't know how to hold gratitude and resentment in the same chest. She didn't know how to forgive a mark that had been forced and also understand that it had saved her child. Kael's voice dropped for her alone. You were brave. Elara swallowed hard. I didn't have a choice. Kael's eyes held hers. You did. You chose him. Alara's breath trembled out. I always will. Kael nodded once like a vow accepted. Behind them, Morel stepped forward. Her voice cut through the silence with authority. The pack must decide. An elder rose, slowly, gaze shifting between Kael, Elara, and Kael. His expression was stiff, but his spine bowed. The Alpha has chosen, he said at last. Another elder followed, then another. One by one, wolves lowered their heads, not all willingly, not all happily, but all understanding the same truth Kael Draven had made his claim. And the Northern Dominion obeyed. Elara stood slowly, still holding Kael's hand, her knees shaking. The hall felt different now, less hostile, less uncertain, still heavy, still complicated, but no longer hopeless. Later, when the manor quieted and the snow outside softened into gentle falling instead of a storm, Elara found herself on the balcony again, this time not alone. Kael stood between her and Kael, bundled in warm furs, cheeks pink from the cold. His small hands clutched theirs as if anchoring them together. Elara stared out at the white world, breathing an air that no longer smelled like escape. It smelled like stillness, like maybe finally safety. Kael stood beside her, silent as always. Elara didn't look at him at first. She didn't trust herself to, because the question that had haunted her since the healer's revelation was still there, sharp as ice. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. Are you staying because you have to? Kael's gaze remained forward. I could turn my back, he said simply. Alara's heart clenched. And will you? Kael turned his head, then looking at her fully, his voice dropped, and in it there was a sincerity that made Alara's chest ache. I don't want to. Elara swallowed, eyes burning. Even if your wolf hadn't recognized me, Kael's jaw tightened. He paused as if choosing words carefully, an unusual thing for him. Then he said, "My wolf is part of me." Elara's breath hitched. Kael continued quieter. "But the choice to stay is mine." Kael squeezed their hands as if satisfied with that answer, even if Elara wasn't sure she was. He leaned his head against Elara's side and whispered sleepily, "No more running, Mama." Elara closed her eyes. The words hit her like a blessing because she realized something. Something I want to say directly from my own perspective, because this is the kind of thing stories hide behind romance when it should be said plainly. Sometimes a happy ending isn't a kiss. Sometimes it's simply a mother realizing she can stop running. Elara opened her eyes and let herself breathe. Snow fell softly around the balcony's edge. Kael stood close, not touching her unless she moved toward him first. And for the first time in a long time, Elara didn't feel hunted. She felt held, not by chains, by choice. She looked out at the northern dominion, at the fortress, the watchfires, the walls. And she whispered, barely audible for the first time, "I have a home." Kael didn't respond with grand words. He simply stayed. And in that staying, Elara found something she hadn't dared want: a future. This story, under all the wolves and titles and battles, is really about three things. Survival is not the opposite of love. It's often the path to it. Elara didn't find safety because she was chosen. She was chosen because she survived when no one thought she would. True strength isn't dominance, it's protection without cruelty. Kael's power mattered, but what changed everything was how he used it, how he chose to shield instead of discard. You don't belong to the people who rejected you. You belong to the life you refuse to give up on. Elara's worth was never decided by Lucian's rejection. It was proven in every step she took through snow with her child in her arms. And maybe that's the real ending. Not that the Alpha claimed the mother, but that the mother finally claimed her own life back and found a place where her child's existence was not an embarrassment, but a legacy. Thank you so much for staying with Elara, Kael, and Kael all the way to the end of this journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more emotional alpha romance stories like this one. And remember, sometimes the place you run to in fear becomes the home you were always meant to find. We'll see you in the next story.